Hi, this is Tim Lightfellow in the Kingdom of Ontir in the Society for Creative Anachronism. Today's video is a little bit different from the ones I've been doing. This is geared towards tips that an archer can use to check what they're doing and help correct things themselves. Something that might have been more helpful more towards the beginning of the pandemic, but hopefully people still find helpful. Um, I will point out that for any particular behavior of the arrow or such, there can definitely be multiple reasons. So what I'm trying to do is highlight the most common ones to try and help people with ways to correct if they see things happening. Um, Again, by no means is this comprehensive, and sometimes it just helps to be on a range and have someone observe what you're doing that can see specifics and help you out in those regards. So the first thing, and you'll see me looking down, I made a cheat sheet because I don't want to forget any of these. The first thing is arrow porpoising. So what that looks like is when you release the arrow, you see like the arrow going up and down as it flies downrange. The most common cause I've seen of this is that the nock is not in the right spot. So if you're using a nock bead, it's shifted maybe the serving it's on is slightly loose and it's slipped. Or if you're just nocking it without a bead, maybe you're nocking it so that the arrow's slightly high or slightly low so that it's hitting the arrow rest basically and doing this as it flies down range. The fix for that is if you have a bow square or something to set your nock bead in the right place, or if you're shooting, with no kind of nock bead or string or marker, then it may just be a case of playing with the placement until you see it flying the way you expect it to. Next thing is arrow fishtailing, which instead of up and down is the going side to side. And that is usually some sort of release issue. It may be that you're kind of plucking the string a little so that you're popping the arrow off to the side just as you release. So then it's doing this to get past the bow. Could be that you are, as you draw, sometimes you may grab the string like this and it may twist as you pull it, which may shove the arrow kind of into the bow. And depending on the how heavy the arrow spine in that is, it could flex slightly, which means when you release, it's bending back the other way to correct, which will also cause that. So again, think about what you're doing with your draw and when you release, and that might help you figure out what you're doing that's causing fishtailing. Let's see, two distinct groups. I've seen this a lot. I've seen it myself. I shoot, one shot's here, next shot's here, next shot's back here, next shot's back here. What that tends to be is that your eyes are fighting for dominance. So each one's kind of trying to take over the sight picture window, and so you tend to end up with kind of those two distinct groups going on. The solution usually is to close your off eye so that you make sure you're looking just with the eye that's looking down the arrow and at the target. This works for most people, but for some people, including me, what I noticed, I have an astigmatism in each eye. So if I close this eye, I lose part of my depth perception. So at something like 40 yards, I can no longer find an aim point. So in that case, it may be a situation where you need to just work on making sure your eyes are hopefully equal strength. I know that there are some techniques out there for strengthening eyes if they're, a little, I think they refer to it as lazy eye. They have some exercises, some ways to force you to use that eye to try and build the strength so that they might be more equal. But again, the most common fix I've seen is closing the non-shooting eye so that it isn't trying to take over that picture window, the sight picture. And I will point out that you can shoot that way even if it's if your off eye is your dominant eye. We have a guy on tour who's shooting in the 80s and 90s, or was. I think he's stopped shooting now. By closing his dominant eye and using his other eye, because that's, I think he's right-handed and his left eye dominant. So, okay. So if you're hitting your elbow, and this one's a little hard to demonstrate, this seems to be more common. I'm going to try and shift so I can hold my arm up. This seems to be more common for women because women's elbows tend to bend so that their arm bends upward. Whereas for guys, ours tend to stick out so that the elbow bends inward. The difference is, you have the meaty part of your elbow. If the elbow's pointing upward, the meaty part's right here in the path of the string. So what you're looking to do is find ways to get that out of the way. And some people, I've been able to point that out and they've been able to just rotate it and they're fine. Some people not so much. One trick that my wife has figured out is if you open up, it kind of looks like the dainty teacup thing, but if you open up those fingers, it helps to rotate the wrist back out a little, which can help rotate the elbow back out a little to get it out of the way. I've heard some other ways I can't think of right now, but that is the big thing, is if you're hitting the elbow, if you're hitting especially if it's, the knob of the elbow, basically the side where the bones are, you're looking for some way that doesn't injure you to rotate the elbow out a little bit so that you're less likely to hit it. And again, I will point out also that there are ways that people have tried that have caused injury. In fact, my wife was told to do a certain thing, like I think it was against the wall, to press against the wall and rotate, and she ended up hurting her shoulder. So be cautious and make sure you're, if you're talking about doing exercises or something, do make sure you're checking with an appropriate person, trainer, doctor, something, to make sure you're not going to do something that's going to make things worse. Okay, if your arrow keeps coming off the arrow rest, a couple different possible solutions that are common. One is if you're pulling, a lot of us shoot with split, 3-finger split grip so that the arrow sits between. So if you're pulling too much with the top on the string, you can actually be pulling the arrow upward, which lets it pop off the arrow rest. The other thing, as I mentioned before, I referred to the string getting twisted and pushing the arrow into the bow. Well, you can do the same thing and end up twisting the string away from the bow, which can pull the arrow off the arrow rest. So you want to try to keep the string straight as you pull it backward and not, twist your fingers in one direction or another as you pull. So those are the two common reasons that the arrow jumps off. As for addressing if you're pulling too much with your top finger, I've seen people mess with their elbow location so that they force their hand into a straight up and down position. We usually don't recommend that because now different muscles are doing all the work of pulling. But that is potentially a solution. The other one is just working on making sure you're keep these locked in place as you pull, so that you know that you're not, pulling more with one finger or more with the others. Let's see, if you see the arrow do what I can only really describe as jumping off the bow. So it's like you release and the arrow looks like it just kind of suddenly jumps up in the air and as it flies. And a lot of times what you'll see at the other end is it kind of has more of an arc to it as well, rather than being a straighter shot like you expect. What that tends to be is the opposite of what I was just talking about. That tends to be pulling more with the bottom. And what that can do is literally between the arrow rest and the string, if this is knocked on the string well and solidly, pulling too much on the bottom of the string can actually cause the arrow to flex downward, which means once you release, it's jumping up off the arrow rest because it's trying to spring back up straight. So it can look like it's kind of jumping off the bow and flying different than you expect. So same things. Again, I've seen some people use their elbow. The better way is, if you observe that, is to be conscious to pull just a little more with your top finger to try and even out the pull so that you aren't seeing that behavior. Sometimes you can see it yourself. Sometimes you may, I've had someone who was shooting and was like, I don't understand. It seems like they're all higher than I expect. And I said, well, I noticed that, you had just a very slight curve on your arrow each time. And they corrected that and the arrows were flying the way they thought they should. So sometimes you can catch it yourself. Sometimes someone else watching sees it and points it out. This next one, and again, this next one I'll point out as a reminder that I'm going for the most common causes because there can be a lot of others. All your arrows landing to one side or the other on the target. Without going into all the specifics about spine weight and matching arrows to bows and that, which can have that kind of impact. If this is something you haven't seen and now you're seeing it, what that can tend to mean is that maybe you've changed your stance a little. Maybe you're opening that front foot up a little to the range more, so your arrows are going to that side more. Maybe you're closing yourself off more. Your feet, instead of being even, your back foot's a little behind the front foot or a little further back to your back, which closes you off to the range. And those kinds of things can affect where arrows land. An interesting note on this is that sometimes you will find that a bow shoots better if you do one of those things. So I have a long bow that it seems like if I close myself off to the range more, I'm more accurate with the longbow. If I try that with my recurve, it messes it up. So there's several common scenarios, things that you can hopefully observe yourself and then have some idea now of potential causes and ways to address those. I will mention one other thing on the whole dominant eye thing as a possible option for people is that we have a friend who she can't get herself to close her off eye when she's shooting, and it's fighting for dominance. And what she did is she went out and bought an eye patch. So she literally puts on an eye patch at the beginning of practice and shoots. That way she's forcing herself to only use the eye that is aligned with the arrow and the target. So possible option if you're trying to force yourself to use one eye, but you just can't get yourself to close that eye, maybe it'll help you. Thank you. I hope this helps. I hope that there are more comments made on this video because I'm sure there are things I'm forgetting. There are alternate potential causes to some of these that others have experienced. And please share in the comments so we can all learn. Thank you, and I hope this is helpful. Have a good day.